Welcome once again to Bitcoin Mentor. I am here with Dale Warburton. For many of you, you probably already know who he is, but for those very few Bitcoiners who don't, I'm going to read his bio literally right off the Bitcoin Mentor webpage. Dale Warburton, Managing Mentor, Bitcoin Mentor, Australia region. That's right, we are in Australia, Aussies, so come on down. We got a lot of Bitcoin help we can offer. Dale, that's not in the bio, by the way. Dale is a qualified attorney with a diversified background spanning commercial, real estate, technology, and digital media. His professional qualifications include a Bachelor of Arts, Law, and Political Philosophy. I have a similarly worthless degree. Bachelor of Laws, Master of Property Studies, and a diploma in financial planning. Despite having a traditional value investor mindset, the unprecedented fiscal and monetary response of 2020 led him to identify Bitcoin as likely the most profound technological innovation since the internet. I'd go with fire myself, but hey, whatever.
Each their own.
Soon after he launched the Why Bitcoin show, he's had the privilege of talking with and learning from some of the brightest minds in the space. Dale's dedication, knowledge, and passion for Bitcoin is self-evident. As a strong advocate of freedom and self-sovereignty, he's helped onboard numerous friends and family around the world into Bitcoin self-custody. Outside of Bitcoin, Dale loves the African bush and is also a big fan of mixed martial arts. Dale, did I more or less cover it?
You nailed it. Thanks so much for having me on. And great to be here, man.
Not at all. Well, I guess we're done then. The podcast is over.
Podcast's over. Yeah, no, that was superb. It's almost like it's sort of putting my best foot forward. That's sort of everything in a nutshell. But happy to unpack anything in there that you might find of particular interest.
Well, I'd love to. You said you got into it back in 2020, and so many people come at Bitcoin from such different places. Some because of philosophical issues, some because they're interested by the technology, some just pure financial gain. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. Can you tell us, maybe dive in a little bit deeper of what really led you to Bitcoin? Was it one or the other, or some combination of them, or just something entirely different?
I think it's a little combination. So I've always been somebody who is naturally anti-authoritarian, contrarian. Whenever someone says go left, I go right. Just instinctually, I just don't want to follow what people want me to do. And it's got me into a lot of trouble in regular life, but it's also helped me in other ways to think differently. And so I think 2020, just from a financial perspective, it was so obvious to me, like, these guys are printing so much money, everyone's staying at home. And then it got me going down the rabbit hole of what is money. That was the third touch point from Bitcoin in terms of, like, from a financial perspective. I previously just dismissed it, a value investor, if you like. I'd read Benjamin Graham's stuff. I was a Warren Buffett disciple. I wasn't picking stocks. I just bought the S&P, just wrote it up and down. I was like, I can't pick stocks, but if it hasn't got a cash flow, it doesn't make sense to me. And that was really kind of my framework. And in 2020, it just kind of kept hitting me in the face over and over again. I mention this often when I've spoken about it in the past, but it was the one and only Raoul Pal, shitcoin extraordinaire, who got me into this space. And I'll always be grateful for that. That was kind of the one element. Got me going down, what is money? And so it was just purely financial, purely greed. I was like, this is the fastest horse in the race. I've got some capital that I want to deploy. It's been sitting on the sidelines, been waiting to buy a house. And now it's like, you know what, let's put this to work. And so, initially it was a small location, then it became bigger, then it became bigger and bigger and bigger. And we know where this goes. So that's the number go up, NGU. We love the NGU technology, don't we? But I love freedom go up as well. And I come from South Africa, as you probably tell. And South Africa suffers from capital controls. Would you believe it? Like most third world nations, they don't want their capital to disappear because not only the talent is leaving, but also the capital. The smart money started getting their money out of South Africa in the 90s. And everyone has had constraints in terms of the actual scope of being able to do that. So in other words, you could only bring out like R1 million a year. Otherwise, you need to apply for Reserve Bank clearance, and that involved 45 different forms and ID and proof and everything like that. You could just imagine. So it's like, and they don't index it. So, so at the end of the day, like, there's that capital controls aspect, but it's also just the case of I saw what was happening in Canada, and I could not believe my eyes when I saw, like, literally funds being confiscated that were donated to the truckers. And I thought to myself, are you joking? Like, here you've got supposedly a Western liberal democracy confiscating people's money. And so from that perspective, I thought, you know what? It's capital with wings. It's what I call fuck you money. And it's also the fastest horse in the race. So win, 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 win. I love it. And so I guess that's sort of my Bitcoin journey. But clearly, there's something that's driving the thread throughout. One is a willingness to revisit your prior assumptions, having that intellectual humility to like go, hold on, maybe there's a there, and not dismissing it like so many of the finance bros I talk to. And then also just, and really putting in the time, frankly. I think you need 100 hours, Gary. I don't know about most people, but like, I don't think you get Bitcoin less than 100 hours. So, so it was a combination of those two things. And so, and we can talk later about sort of other things that I've started challenging in my life since looking at Bitcoin. But I guess that sort of sums up. Number go up and freedom go up, man. That's what I came for.
I think that's great. Like you said, you went in for a purely financial motive, and you've broadened your mind along the way, and now you have other motivations for it as well. It's wonderful. There's no wrong way to get into Bitcoin, as far as I'm concerned. I definitely am with you on the contrarian thing. We don't need to get into politics if you don't want to, but just personally, I'm kind of libertarian type sensibilities, and I remember going to. Let me preface this by saying I'm in kind of the performance entertainment actor space. Almost all of my friends are to the left. And before that, I worked on Capitol Hill in a Republican office. Almost all of my friends were on the right. I was always kind of like the token libertarian in the room. And I felt fine with that. It was great. Cool. I'm the token libertarian in the room. No problem. And then I did some stand-up comedy years ago, maybe 8 years ago over at, or 7 years ago at Freedom Fest out in Vegas. And this is like a whole convention of libertarians. And it felt so weird because like everybody in the room is now thinking like me. And then, of course, I immediately start guessing myself like, second guessing myself. Wait a minute, everybody's going this way. Shouldn't I be going that way? Suddenly I'm the sheep in the room. And, you can go down a big rabbit hole with this. I'm with you on that all the way.
Yes, and I agree with you, Gary. I mean, like, sorry to interrupt there, but
No.
like, I similarly have, libertarian sympathies. I first came across the one and only Robert Nozick during my political philosophy degree, and when we're talking about tax as legitimized theft, I was like, I couldn't describe it anything any better. Like that's exactly what it is, and it's fine. And so I look at tax as pay to play. It's like, am I getting a quid pro quo that seems reasonable? And, what I've signaled to my wife is that perhaps there'll be a day, and I keep planting the seed, there'll be a day potentially when we've got a tax problem because the quid pro quo here doesn't make sense. And I need to find a jurisdiction that does make sense. But for the minute, it actually works. But I think that's how I think about things.
Good for you. Where do you think this contrarian nature came from? You think it was sort of naturally part of you, or something that kind of grew as part of your childhood? I'd love to hear a little bit about you growing up in South Africa.
Yeah, I do believe there's a strange sort of hereditary / genetic element to it. I've my dad, his brother, and my cousin. We are similar in some ways in the sense that we're very comfortable telling people they're wrong when we believe strongly in what we believe in. We don't mind thinking differently. I think part of it was also through my high school experience. So I was born in Johannesburg, went to a dual medium school, English Afrikaans, girls and boys. And it was like a real place of me being the popular boy. I was first team cricket, opening bowler, opening batsman. It doesn't mean anything to your audience potentially, but I was the man. I was the quarterback. I got all the girls. Everyone loved me, right? And then I moved to a private school. One of the
I was never that, by the way. So please don't continue.
So and then I went across to Cape Town, which is a far more beautiful city. At the tip of Africa. And, I went to this private school, all boys. They'd come from very privileged backgrounds. I hadn't come from a privileged background. My dad just happened to work really hard and get into a position where we were very fortunate. But these kids are getting BMWs as the first car, that sort of thing. And so, there were two main feeder schools into that high school, and I was on the outside, and it felt weird for 2 years, kind of like not being the popular guy, not being the cool guy, no girls chasing after me. I was like, what the hell's going on here? So it was hard to fit in. Eventually, I found my crew, kind of misfits, different people, and I think that really like reinforced the thinking differently thing. And then you go from this very I suppose rigid and structured way of learning, going, and then also all the rituals that accompany a private Anglican school, going to chapel every day, praying, kneeling, standing up, standing down, singing psalms. I wasn't religious, but I had to participate in these rituals. And, I remember like this one incident, and this is just an example where it was like, if you were in matric, which would be grade 12, your last year of high school, you were allowed to walk on the grass. If you weren't, you had to follow the paths. And I just walked across the grass one day, and this guy just screams and shouts, like, who the fuck do you think you are? And I was like, are you joking? You're telling me I can't walk on grass? So it's just like, those are the kinds of things. So that played into kind of, it formed my identity. And then eventually, as I sort of went to, the minute I finished school, obviously growing hair, got my hair really long, started listening to new metal, and got piercings, got my ear pierced, eyebrows. I still got my labreccia today, and just started exploring counterculture, because I rejected kind of the mainstream. You go and get a job at you go and do like a finance degree, then you go and get a job at one of the, it's a law firm, an accounts firm, whatever. It didn't appeal to me at that stage of my life. And so, I've always just been this person who I think is innately, I don't want to say rebellious, but I think just critical thinking. I've used this example before, but, when I was 6, my teacher at the time told me that the rhino was extinct. And I just put in the class, and I put in my hand, and I was like, sorry, I actually saw the rhino, so that's not true. So you have to be so, and she's like, Dale, please. And I was like, no, but I've seen them. So, that's the kind of stuff, Gary. So I think it's like, there is always this, I think there's a degree to which, I can't say I was like red pilled. It was like, this is who I am. And I'm different. I've always been a little bit different in that sense. And some people love it. They absolutely love me for that. And some people don't. And that's okay.
That's fine. That's great. Those are the people who love you want to hang out with anyway, and the people who don't, they can go their way, you go yours, and everybody's happy. No big deal.
Exactly, man.
I saw you have, like we said in the intro, you have a bit of I guess what we would call here in the States, a poli-sci degree. When you were a younger man before your university days, what kind of, I guess, field did you imagine yourself getting into professionally?
Do you know what's funny? So my dad is like, he was a bit of a kind of a heavyweight within the retail finance space, and there were a lot of expectations as what is this man's boy going to do? Do you know what I mean? And again, the rebellious Dale was like, I'm not following your steps. And one of the things that I have spoken often about is the fact that I feel connected not only to people, but the universe as a whole when I'm in nature, like pure, unbridled, brutal nature. Like, I love the African bush, just everything it is. Like, it is the most brutal place on earth, but it's the most beautiful place on earth. And, so I think I wanted to be a game ranger. I wanted to go and work in the game reserves. And so, that was kind of what I imagined as a youngster. We used to go to the bush all the time. I go to the African bush every single year, and will for the rest of my life, because it's my church. It's what I say. It's like me going to Mecca. It's my little pilgrimage. I have to do it because I'm a different person in the sense that I feel really connected, and nothing can bother me. I'm like the happiest man on earth, being in nature. So I think that's what I planned. But I did like a shadowing, and I realized, and I also did try to do a course. But it turns out, like, learning about individual grasses is not that interesting. Clearing out alien weeds is not that interesting. And it's all part of being a game ranger in the sense of it's not just about like taking people around and showing them, lions, elephants, leopards. It's about the whole ecosystem. And I'm not as excited about those things. And so I don't actually know what I wanted to do. And this is kind of like, Gary, I still don't know, man. I've done so many things. You read my bio, and I'm kind of like, I've done so many different things, and the journey it's been really interesting. I mean, challenging, and it's formed who I am today. And I probably wouldn't change it. I did the law degree, and then everyone goes, yeah, you got to go. There's no point in doing a law degree if you're not going to do your articles, which is like to qualify. So I'm like, okay, I'll do 2 years, and I knew in 2 weeks that I'm not going to be a lawyer. And even the secretary was like, I know you're not going to be a lawyer. So it's like, I've got to go through this ritual for the next, couple of years. And obviously everyone had high hopes for me because, I was my dad who was who he was. And so I think I got given to the managing partners. Like I got given to the top dogs as their candidate attorney to work with. They were like, we think Dale's going to do some good shit here. And I was like, no. Dale doesn't work late. Dale just manages his time and then goes home when he can. Like he's not going to stay after hours. So I guess, Gary, like I'm still kind of figuring out, and nothing, I can say this like with 100% certainty, nothing has captured my imagination, and I'm as passionate about as Bitcoin. Not even close. No. Not even close.
I'm 100% with you. I totally get that. And, I guess it's a mark against me that if I'm not into something, I'll kind of like phone it in to a degree. There are people who are like, well, that's my job. I'm here to do it. I'm going to do the absolute best I can and work overtime and everything. And kudos to them. You're a better man than I am, because I can tell you when I used to work on Capitol Hill for 6 years, I think I might have come into the office on time twice, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I got the minimum amount of work done that needed to be done, but it's government. How much work is there? You just take the forms from stack A and put them to stack B and back again. But then when I left to get into the entertainment biz, something that I genuinely fully enjoyed, you'd say, your call time's 5 a.m. I'll be there at 4:30. I'm happy to be there. Let's go. And now with Bitcoin, I'm equally as passionate about that. I mean, I love this. And along those lines, I was watching you on, Why Are We Bullish with Ben, and you were saying, part of having this great amount of money isn't so you can buy the next fancy car or things. And I'm very similar in that way. You envision doing good things with it for mankind. Could you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah, so my passion is the bush, man. And when I say the bush, Aussies understand it as one thing. I don't know what that means necessarily stateside or in Canada, but in South Africa, it means going to like a game reserve, where if you just walked around without any guns, you'd get murdered within the day by a lion or a leopard or a buffalo or an elephant or something. Like you are just nothing there. You're on your own, especially, right? And then double that at night. Like you're absolutely done. And unfortunately, though, there are increasing amounts of risks posed towards the future of nature conservation around Africa. And, South Africa has the largest quantity of rhinos, as an example. And for a host of reasons, there are people in the world that believe that there is some value in keratin within, a rhino horn. And it's, people think it's people use it as like some sort of like, it's a rhino equivalent of Viagra. No, that's not really the main thing. The main thing is actually people like to shave it off, put in a bit of whiskey, and that's a nice way to celebrate the start of a business relationship. It's actually like...
Just a second, because you cut out there for about 5 seconds when you were on the keratin in the horn. Can you get right back to that and go through it?
So the keratin in the horn, people around the world, some people think that there is some innate value in taking that keratin, shaving it into some whiskey, and then clinking glasses and going, this is a prosperous business relationship. And then people started 3D printing horns. And guess what? They figured out, well, we don't want those 3D printed horns. So they know what they started doing? Hacking off the faces of rhinos so that they want the actual head and face. Because then you can take this to the guy who's wealthy and say, we actually chop this thing's face off. And this all happens, like there's videos online. It's absolutely brutal, right? And so you've got these real, like Africa, I'm not bullish on long term as a economic powerhouse. It's just riddled with crime and corruption, and I think conservation is at the bottom of the list. And so my contribution, I think, will be preserving pieces of African wilderness and trying to provide, I guess, a safe haven for those types of animals like rhino, as I've just described. I'd love to be able to do that on a bigger scale. Like I support, as an example, a charity called Four Paws. They've got a facility in South Africa called Lion Rock where you've got essentially abused big cats. And I just have such a special place in my heart with big cats. I love them, lion, leopards, tigers. And these are animals that have literally never touched grass before. They've had all their claws ripped out. They've been beaten and abused. And so they get sent to this resort where they're not like, they've got like species appropriate cages, so they're not on display. If they want to hide, they can hide. And they basically get to retire in peace and quiet. And so I give them a little money every month, and I know, like, I've been there, I've seen it, and the people's heart's in the right place. So having wealth enables me to do more of that at scale. And I guess that's my thing. I think that we should care about something, because I don't think you're a libertarian. You'll appreciate this. I don't think the government can get anything right. Okay, most of the time. So I think, like I like animals. I have huge sympathy towards old people, and I want to support them more. And obviously children. Those are my things I care about. Other people care about other things, and that's good. And we need people to care about other things.
No, it's great. You cut out again with other people care about other things, but I think you finished up right after that. So
I finished up there.
That was perfect. So when you want to, you want to preserve more of the bush and more of the wildlife, do you envision doing that with your money someday when you have more of it? Do you envision doing that individually? For instance, we have an organization here in America, an environmental group, and the name escapes me for just a moment, but their whole thing is they don't lobby the government for more laws. They'll just actually raise money to buy the parts of the land that they want to preserve. So it's privately owned.
Yes.
Do you imagine doing it that way?
Yes, 100%. You can't rely on the government to do anything right. Again, especially in Africa. But that, to me, that applies equally anywhere in the world. The only caveat to what I'm saying is you have to have an independent judiciary and private property rights. And if you don't have those, you can't deploy your capital. And right now, in South Africa, it's okay. Would I want to bet the farm? Would I want to sell all my Bitcoin and buy a spot? Absolutely not, because that to me would be, that's basically throwing everything away, potentially. Any money that I use to acquire land would be, in my view, kind of just like, this is money that if I lost, I'd be okay. Mm-hmm. And because there's always a risk of a more populist Marxist party coming into power in South Africa, and basically just, and then also, if the courts suddenly are no longer independent, you're actually dead, because then they can just make whatever decision they like, and they can start expropriating land. And the first will be these like national parks and private property, of course. I mean, it's just like I'm just envisioning, like, I'm trying to think of worst case scenarios, but at the same time I'm going, well, you can't be too negative, because at the same time I actually want to do something. So I think, how does it start? What it looks like, I think in the next 5 years I'll be able to buy a share within a private nature reserve. Okay, so in a home in a private nature reserve, and then I think within 10 to 15 years I'll be able to buy a small nature reserve, 3,000 hectares. Maybe that doesn't mean anything to people, but 3,000 hectares of pristine African wilderness with the big five, that's what I would love. And right now, to give you an example, the place that my family goes to, where we head to, the adjacent farm was for sale recently at 50 million rand. Call it, I think it's about 4 million Aussie, which would be about 3 million US. You can buy 3,000, 3,500 of, beautiful bush for, say, 3 million US. So there'll be some time, I think, before we can, and I'm not going to do this on my own. I've got people who I know are passionate to do this with, and so we're going to do this together. So I want to take a portion of my stack at some point, and that's why I hope Bitcoin runs really hard in the next 20 years so that I can then accelerate this mission. And yeah, I've contemplated all sorts of things, man. Bitcoin safaris and something to that effect. But I guess right now I'm just a pleb with a relatively small stack that is just trying to do small little things like donating to causes that I appreciate.
No, that sounds great, man. You talked about how difficult it is, being able to buy land in a place where you don't know if you'll actually be able to keep it long term. And a lot of folks in the Bitcoin space, we always say, Bitcoin fixes this, as if there's not a problem in the world that Bitcoin can't fix. And, the libertarian in me at least wants to believe that as we move to a hard money, governments around the world will have less ability to do bad things because they'll actually have to pay for it with real money and have real consequences. I mean, do you think that eventually Bitcoin can kind of help solve that problem where, states might just seize your land? Or do you think that's just a long-term function of the human condition that maybe this is something that Bitcoin can't solve?
So I don't know if this is a controversial view, but, I'm not one of these Bitcoiners who believes that states are going to adopt Bitcoin and it's going to become a ubiquitous currency or medium of exchange. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think states are going to forgo their rights to print money. And so from that perspective, I think it's going to be driven more so by private individuals. Now, what's the value of real estate relative to Bitcoin in terms of true ownership? Whether it's the holding cost, whether it's a risk of expropriation, etc. I mean, there's no competition. There's no second best in that sense. But yeah, I mean, sorry, maybe perhaps I'm not answering your question, but I tend to believe that governments are not going to let go of the printing press. The good governments will allocate a portion of their treasury to Bitcoin, which will mean that the value of their fiat relative to others will potentially decline slower. Like I often say fiat's like a melting ice cube, and in some parts of the world, literally the ice cube is getting cut in half, every year. Other parts, it's like every 7.5 years. Like, if it's 10% per annum, every 7.5 years, you've lost half the purchasing power, kind of thing. So, but that's kind of the world I'm envisioning. And so the smart states start adopting it, whether they confiscate it from, criminals, or whether they actually start mining it, or whatever the case may be, however they wish to accumulate it themselves. I mean, if they were smart, they'd go and print the money and buy the bloody Bitcoin and just leave it on the balance sheet. But that's thinking too long term, and the only people who are going to do that are going to be the so-called tyrants and the dictators, like, the Putins of the world, who don't give a shit about term limits. So they can have a strategic plan. Whereas us in the West, we're very excited about the fact that we've got democracy, but it means we don't get anything done because every 4 years somebody's different with a different plan. So, I don't know, Gary. I don't know what the answer is there.
I feel like that is a feature, not a bug. I don't want these people getting things done, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But no, I get what you're saying. What do you think happens? And I'm sorry to keep it macro so long. If you want to switch to something else, we can.
Go for it.
But we've all heard of like game theory. We have El Salvador adopting Bitcoin, and if the United States has a strategic reserve, so many of these countries are going to follow suit. If that happens, do you think there are countries that, like you said, don't follow suit, that have just got, no, we're just going to print our own money, we have nothing to do with Bitcoin? And if so, what do you envision happening to those countries relative to the others?
I mean, those who adopt Bitcoin achieve some sort of strategic advantage long term. I think if I zoom right out, my macro framework for a decade is largely predicated kind of on a hybrid of the sovereign individual meets the fourth turning. And
Okay.
I think that we're at the it's happening. We're at the pointy end of the stick, as my Australian friends would say. Things are happening. Things are getting real, and I think we just saw it with this last election. Like, people are just fed up. There's just a huge, overwhelming sentiment. They're just fed up with the way, like, the giant bureaucracy and the inefficiency of everything. And but I still believe things could potentially get more. So there could be more unrest, more division, etc. We're seeing the world.
Things can always get worse.
There's no limit. There seems to be no ceiling to how bad things can get. But there will be a great cleanse. There will be something that changes. There will be a trigger that suddenly gets us moving in a more positive direction. And I'm not too sure what that looks like. But I think, so to go back to the question, is that I do believe that Bitcoin will play a strategic role in both individuals and nation states. From an individual level, more and more people are going to adopt Bitcoin because I think it's capital with wings. They realize we don't need these capital controls. Okay, I can go wherever I'm treated best, basically. And those nations that will create favorable tax treatment will attract those individuals. As for nation states, we're now living in a world, and it's happening in real time. BRICS, which originally was, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, is now expanding. And it's basically a conglomerate of everyone who may or may not step on the US's toes. And China's been very strategically smart because they can think in decades, unlike us. And they jumped when they became part of the World Trade Organization. They just slowly started hollowing out the US middle class. We got all the manufacturing exported, and you just created this massive wealth divide. Chucking fentanyl into the country, all sorts of like smart stuff, infiltrating Congress and all sorts of different things. And they're doing this around the world over. They got their Belt and Road Initiative. They, all over Africa. They built dams. Oh, we'll give it to you for free. Oh, you didn't pay. Oh, because you're all bloody criminals. Well, guess what? We're taking your airports. We're taking this. Yeah. We're taking a strategic port. And so now, if you look at like who are the major trading partners with most of the, like, is it the US? Was it China? Most people are trading more with China. So in that sort of way, the world's become multipolar, if you want. And so they've got, I think, an incentive to attach some sort of currency, a BRICS currency, to some basket of commodities. Now, the rational thing would be to allocate a portion of that to Bitcoin. Whether they do it or not is another story. They'll say it's gold, and like always, they'll break the trust, okay? And then there'll be more currency than gold. That's just the nature of humans. But if they were smart, if they wanted to really stick it to the US, I think they should be backing their whatever their basket might be in with a little bit of Bitcoin. And then we'll return to a more natural state where people around the world can trade whatever goods and services they have, like nation states can trade it in, whether it's the US dollar, they can trade it in Bitcoin, or they can do it in this third currency, which is like, let's call it BRICS currency, which is a combination of, maybe it's a market cap weighted fiat plus gold plus Bitcoin plus silver plus whatever, right? So that's the world I kind of envision. And I see that happening in the next decade. I see things like, I see it being more decentralized. I think that nation states are going to, certain factions within nation states are going to break up. Like you might have, this is not a prediction, but maybe, like the French Canadians are getting like increasing loud and they're like, oh, we don't want to be part of this shit. We don't like Justin Trudeau. Or, you might find more and more countries are not finding the EU very beneficial at all. Like, I don't think the EU is going to be around in a decade. That's just my view. The euro.
Wow.
I think the euro
That's
is
your hot
dead.
take, huh?
That's my hot take, mate. Yes.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's how we're going. That's so that's how I see things happening, Gary. But, what is a good idea versus what will be done? That's chalk and cheese. I have no clue.
No, I don't know, man. And even the idea of like what is a good idea, going back to your when you mentioned earlier about banning rhino horns, and was it banning or was it they just came up with 3D printers?
Well, they came up with 3D, so you can ban it. It doesn't change the fact that there's a demand. You can print 3D, and then people go, well, that's not real. I want the real deal, so we'll just chop the rhinos' faces off. So, so it's like, the road is I suppose it's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So a bunch of
Yeah,
Silicon Valley wokesters sat around and they were like, "Oh no, we can solve the rhino horn problem."
exactly.
And it's
Well,
like,
because I was going to say, yeah, it reminds me. Are you familiar with the cobra thing in India? The cobra
no,
question.
no,
Oh, you've never heard of this?
mm-mm.
And somebody's gonna listen to the podcast and say, Gary, how did you not know who posed this issue or who talks about it? And there's an actual title for it. And I forget right now. I'm sorry, it's late and I have a bit of a cold. That's my excuse. But the idea was at some point in India, I'm pretty sure it was India, there was a law passed to try to stem the problem of having all these cobras, whatever in the village or in the state, wherever it was. And the government came in and tried to lower the population. So they came up with a great idea. The idea was, if you bring in a cobra to us, we will pay you for it. Now, on the surface, it sounds great. It incentivizes people to get those cobras off the street, bring it into the government because they're going to get money. You use people's own greed to make it work. It sounds great on the surface. Fast forward 5-10 years, there are more cobras than ever. What happened? I don't know if you can take a guess, but it made total sense after the law was passed.
Yeah, and that story that's writ large. Anytime somebody has interfered with an ecosystem, like it causes chaos. The cane toad here is a perfect example. We got these bugs that are eating the sugar cane. Okay, let's just get this frog over, this cane toad. Well, it's poisonous, so nothing wants to eat it. And then it's like, bring the cane toad in. We'll pay you 10 cents a cane toad. Well, what does that mean? It means that the big cane toads that were they literally are like what's the word when they eat their own kind?
Cannibalism.
Cannibals. They're cannibals. They eat their own kind. So actually, what you want is more giant cane toads just smash you with the little fellas. So they got rid of all the little, the big ones, and they're catching them. And then meanwhile, these little fellas are just proliferating everywhere, and there's no predators. So parts of Australia are just awash with these animals. And so I'll give you another example, and this is actually really recent. I saw something in the EU where, as part of some sort of desire, some genius central planner decided that they wanted to create more rivers. So they needed Spain to shut off their dams. And so they closed 133 dams. Well, would you believe it if I told you now that there's unprecedented flooding in Valencia because all the natural catchment areas have been wrecked. So this has happened. It's the law of unintended consequences.
Law of unintended consequences. Well, in this case, and there's so many times where there are natural consequences, like you said, where nature's going to do what nature's going to do. In this case, it was a total market consequence because India's paying you to turn in the cobras. Oh, well, if I'm getting money to turn in cobras, I'm just going to get a whole bunch of cobras and breed a whole bunch more so the government will pay me more. That's why the cobra population exploded. It was insane unintended consequences. But yeah, so that when you mentioned the rhino horn, that's what it totally reminded me of. Like, oh, we're going to try to solve this problem of the rhinos. Oh, no, you've made a bigger problem because now instead of chipping away at the horn, they're just taking the entire face. So, hey, Great. Yeah. Great job.
It's amazing. And it's a book, actually. I've just started, I read every single day and I usually fall asleep to it because I'm so tired. But I'm working through an economics book, Economics in One Lesson, and it's this book that
Hazlitt
has been, and honestly, the first lesson is just second and third order consequences. And when was that more evident than 2020? Do you know what I mean? It's like nobody was thinking like, what does it do to kids' development if you force them into a classroom with this this cloth mask on, and it's like, is it possible that some of them are going to have learning difficulties because they can't hear properly or speak properly and they can't mimic you? Like, why is no one thinking about this? Like, who cares what you think about, the actual virus? Not one policymaker actually had the foresight or the willingness to think beyond their nose because they're in the business of selling cheap solutions at face value. They don't care about what happens downstream.
Yeah, it's all incentive structure, and I don't necessarily blame them for that. That's their incentive. You're trying to win an election. You're thinking in 2 4 year cycles, and you just need to get 50% plus one of the vote, or even a plurality in our country. And the incentives are very different from actual market incentives, where you're actually going to your own capital's on the line, and you're going to be held to account if you mess it up. It's just a totally different incentive structure. I'm
Couldn't agree
sorry to
more.
take this so macro because this is a Bitcoin talk, but getting back to Bitcoin Mentor, working with people. What are the types of people you like to work with when you're helping folks with Bitcoin?
So you know what I tell people, like when I talk about what I do within Bitcoin Mentor, I say like I assist people with the how and less so the why. Like firstly, you've got to do your own due diligence and figure out what Bitcoin is and get yourself into a position where you're comfortable to allocate. What that represents to you, whether it's material or not, and I'm happy to help you on that journey. But my job's not to sell you Bitcoin. My job's the how. I want you to be able to do what I think is the core sort of value proposition of Bitcoin. Digital bearer instrument means you have to hold your own keys. Otherwise, it's permissioned. Otherwise, it's just another, it's another TradFi product. And that's fine if you want that. But if what you're after is true financial sovereignty, in the sense that you can actually run across borders with 12 words in your head, if that was something that you were looking to do, then I can help you. And so I like to talk to people who are freedom orientated, who are people who are keen to allocate a portion of their wealth to something that is uncorrelated with everything else, the fastest horse in the race, where they've done a little bit of work but need some assistance. They want that it's an overused phrase, but that white glove treatment where it's like, I need somebody to babysit me and make sure that what I'm doing is correct. We take so much for granted as Bitcoiners in terms of, addresses and private keys and multi-sig setups and all the different types of, ways of configuring things. And we go to the nth degree. We think about, like, we have very adversarial thinking embedded into us. And, I know, like every Bitcoiner I know revisits their setup, whether it's quarterly, annually, whatever the case would be. Like nobody is satisfied. There's always like a tiny percent of our brain that's like, could this be better? How could somebody get into this? And our job at Bitcoin Mentor is really to help people safely allocate to Bitcoin and to meet them where they're at. So I'm not going to recommend, the most complicated, open source solution for you today. I'm going to get first I need you to understand if it's on an exchange, it's not yours. It's an IOU and you need to get that in self custody. So I first want to get you in a hot wallet. I generally recommend Blue, but there's a whole bunch that you could use. And then I think you've got to look at a single sig cold wallet, something like the Cold Card. Very simple. Actually, the Cold Card Q is a real win. The UX is actually a total win. I was a little intimidated by it at first, the MK4, but there it is. Yeah, it's beautiful. So it works really seamlessly. And so I guess those are the kinds of conversations that I'm having and that I really enjoy. And I just love meeting people where they're at. There's people whose setups are pretty good. And what I'm trying to just do is give them that reassurance, like, yeah, you're on the right track, but here are some small minor improvements. And then there's other people who's like, okay, hold on, we need to start from the beginning here. I'll help you buy, I'll help you withdraw from exchange, I'll help you get into something a bit more secure, long-term, offline in cold storage. So yeah, and I just love it, man. Honestly, I just love having conversations because it's, how we were talking earlier, like for you, it's getting to an audition. Just for me, it's talking about Bitcoin, it's like, there's not many things that excite me as much as Bitcoin, I must say. So I love it. I mean, I hopped on I went to a Bitcoin meetup the other night, just as an example. And I had like a dude reach out and he was like, on Facebook, because he knew me from 4 years ago. And he's like, I know you're into Bitcoin. Are you prepared to come on a Facebook Live? So I'm at the meetup. All right, sorry, dudes. I'm going to go and have a chat to another guy. And he's talking all about financial freedom. And I'm doing a Facebook Live with like 5 people. And I'm like, I don't care. I love it. I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about Bitcoin anytime.
That's great. I love it. I think that's the exact type of people that everybody was looking for. Bitcoin mentor. I feel like you fit right in.
Yeah,
The same
totally.
ethos, wanting to help people, meet them where they're at, and you're just passionate about Bitcoin. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I know you have a heart out. I'm always happy to talk more, but if you need to wrap it up soon, I'd be happy to ask where people can find you and where they can find your work.
I'll tell you what, let's go down like one more little rabbit hole, 5
All
minutes.
right.
I can
Sure,
do 5 minutes.
please.
So that's cool, mate. So I thought, and this would be, I thought it'd be interesting just to kind of, for people who kind of come into Bitcoin in the beginning, and if they're relatively new, what they realize is Bitcoiners they question so many different things, and they're fanatical about various things, and a lot of it centers around our desire to question, established whatever the status quo is in terms of the information. So, like food, for example. So it's something that I'm looking at, like, and I'm doing right now at the moment, is like really just eliminating seed oils as much as I possibly can from my diet, and cold plunges, and like cold plunges. It's amazing what it does to your body. It kind of resets you.
I'm never doing it. I'm too much of a wuss, but I'm
Oh,
glad
you'll
you
get there.
go
You'll
for it.
get there. Honestly, if you gave it a whirl, it's addictive, man. It builds that mental fortitude. Like it's unbelievable. And then intermittent fasting is something that I've realized as I got older. Like overeating is one of the things that actually contributes so much towards like cellular aging, and it creates a lot of concern. So I went down that path subsequent to Bitcoin as I started questioning the food pyramid and going, well, actually, I need to eat more meats and fats and less of these carbohydrates. Actually, it's the inverse. You're telling me to eat all these, pastas and breads and all this stuff, but it all makes me feel terrible. So, yeah, I don't know what you feel. Like, is there something in your
I'm
life
with
where
you.
you've looked at it and you kind of go, yeah, this was the conventional wisdom, and I just put that on its head, and probably since Bitcoin. Is there anything you can identify in your life?
That's a great question. Because like you, I am a bit of a contrarian, and I don't know if there's a thing where Bitcoin was like a key that unlocked everything else for me. Like, oh, I'm going to question everything. I question things from time to time. Obviously, the food pyramid. I feel like I'm always, a little bit of a step away from my friends and what they do. It doesn't always mean that I'm right. It just I'm like, well, what is the core fundamental the question of any given scenario, any given thing that I'm into. Sorry, I'm at a lack for words right now, but
No,
there's
it
a
makes
term
sense.
I can't think of it. What is the I'm blanking on it.
Don't
I'm
worry,
sorry.
Gary. This happens. This happens. This happens, mate. Don't you worry. But no, I think what you're basically touching on is essentially like there's a bunch of things in your life where you've always been a bit different. You've always thought a bit differently about things, and yeah, I mean, like I thought it'd be useful just to share. Mine is the food pyramid. It's something that I've really revisited, and I've also like things are like I use CBD oil. I prefer CBD oil as opposed to a lot of other things, whether it's for like to help me sleep and all this kind of thing. So it's like take the conventional wisdom with a grain of salt. Do your own do your own research in any particular area. And what I've often found is the so-called expert class are not right because the incentives have driven them to form those opinions. Why do
Yeah.
finance guys not adopt Bitcoin? Because there's a career risk right now. What are they going to do in like a decade? There'll be like a massive career risk not to. So that's sort of like, and it's all driven by incentives. It's the same as like, what are the chances that you're going to have people speaking the truth about experimental gene therapy during COVID when 75% of the ad revenue comes from pharmaceutical companies on TV? Like, what do you think's going to happen? It's not that they're
Sure.
bad people. It's just like, this is just reality. And so I love that about Bitcoin, how it's just really sharpened my focus on incentives. And it's not about like good people, bad people. It's like, show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome. End of
No,
speech.
you're 100% right. And to what you're saying, I try very much not to take people's words simply because they come from a position of authority. I hate arguments from positions of authority. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean that people who have a lot of experience in something like a doctor or lawyer shouldn't be listened to and considered. But you ultimately need to present the actual argument to me. It can't just be, well, I have this piece of paper or these series of letters next to my name, ergo I'm right. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
So you make the case.
You're so right. You're so right. Like, you know, in fiat world, people look up to me in some way because I've got, like, you know, I'm a lawyer. I've got, you know, 3 degrees and a diploma in financial planning. In Bitcoin world, I'm just a regular guy. Nobody cares. Do you know what I mean? And there's people much
Exactly.
smarter than me who've got no degrees, that, you know, society wouldn't necessarily look up to that per se, but it's irrelevant. Like, show me the facts, show me the evidence, tell me what your reasoning is. Don't just say I've got a badge or this is my role. It doesn't matter. Um,
No.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good place to stop it then. And I think last thing I'll add there, Gary, is yeah, this has been awesome, man. It's been a real blast and great connecting. If anyone is interested in listening to me ramble on my podcasts, I sometimes do solos, and sometimes I do I chat to guests. It's the Why Bitcoin Show. Just Google that. Wherever you find podcasts. And then if you want to talk about anything related to self-custody, Dale at bitcoinmentor.io. And we'd love to chat to you.
Give us your Twitter or X handle as well.
Oh, Dale21M.
You got it.
Let's go.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you got to get back to the fiat mines, but much obliged.
Mining away. Let's go. Thanks, Gary. Take care, man.
Take care.